For more, we have joining us today Dr. Myong-hyun, a research fellow from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's good to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, President Trump took to Twitter to rail against what he calls fake news media, as he likes to say, that said little had been achieved at the first summit with Kim Jong-un. So he talked up his successes instead as well, and he said he expects another good meeting with Kim Jong-un, adding that there's much potential. So he seems to be desperate to put a positive spin on things going on with North Korea. But how do you assess the mood between the US and North Korea right now?
Well, I think it's generally positive. I mean, the major stumbling block in the dialogue between the two countries has been the absence of progress in terms of meetings and agreements. And now at least we have a general agreement between the two countries to hold the second summit. So that actually removed a major stumbling block. It's not a normal situation, though. I mean, it's not the second summit is not happening on the basis of an agreement between the staffers on both sides that agreed on the details of denuclearization. We're talking about, in a way, meeting for meeting's sake. But in any way, so it's a progress, and I think both sides are pretty satisfied with that for now.
If that's the case, then Trump, obviously, he's defending his position. Do you think, what are the reasons his critics have put against him? They're saying that so far what he's done has not been that much. And is it slightly, perhaps, unfair on Donald Trump as well? Well,
in a way, both critics and Donald Trump have reasons to believe that they're right. In terms of critics, the expectation going into the first summit last year was that North Korea and the United States would agree on a general roadmap for denuclearization, which didn't happen. And instead, we got the return of our wartime remains and the release of hostages and a general pledge by North Korea to refrain from carrying out further nuclear and missile tests, which they have done that anyways. And on the part of Donald Trump, President Trump, it's been a success in a way. In the sense that North Korea has been behaving well, has really, even though he hasn't really carried out concrete steps towards denuclearization, has refrained from creating instability in the region, and also it's actually committed to the dialogue with the United States. So in a way, we can argue that this is a glass half full or half empty kind of a situation.
Perhaps Trump got a little bit of a leeway of having the glass half full kind of argument, if you look at it. But this time, with the next summit, there's going to be pressure on him to really come up with some sort of results, more substantial anyway than the first summit. But what we're getting out of these reports and rumors around Washington is that we could be looking at a small deal rather than like a complete denuclearization deal that some might have hoped for.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. But we have to be realistic about the prospect of reaching a comprehensive deal regarding North Korea's denuclearization. And the idea of a CVID, or complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear capability, is actually a very complex process. And it cannot be done in a span of 1 or 2 years. It takes multiple years, maybe decades. So in the sense that in order to keep up the momentum of dialogue and progress in denuclearization, it's a good idea to reach a small deal, quote unquote, between the two countries. So lower expectation for now. And the possible small deal between the United States and North Korea at this juncture could mean that North Korea carries out what they promised to do before, such as shutting down the Myong-hyun nuclear plant, and then also shutting down the Punggye-ri and Dongchang-ri test sites in exchange for the United States agreeing to relax some of the sanctions measures. But then in this case, it will be a serious relaxation and could possibly involve either of the joint inter-Korean economic projects. One is the Kaesong Industrial Complex, and the other will be the Myong-hyun tourism project. But given the presence of existence of sanctions measures against both projects, but then relatively speaking, the Myong-hyun project is actually much more flexible in terms of relaxing sanctions against it. So it's possible that the United States might offer North Korea that it will allow South Korea to resume the Myong-hyun tourism project. So that's a broad sketch of a possible small deal that could be happening in the second summit.
There seems to be pressure for both North Korea and Trump to get some sort of result from this next potential summit, because obviously North Korea's economy is in dire straits, and any kind of easing of sanctions would perhaps help their economy. Then Trump, he's also facing a lot of pressure over domestic issues that are happening in the US right now. So do you think that kind of forces them to make these kind of smaller deals and smaller compromises, and to have at least some sort of deal rather than nothing at all right now?
Well, that's definitely true. But on the other hand, we have to understand that whereas the political constraints or political difficulties that President Trump is facing are real, and then his political position is apparently getting more precarious by the day. But I think the North Koreans' calculation could be a little bit different, because the cycle of political cycle in the United States is actually it actually happens in terms of months rather than years, whereas the economic deterioration in North Korea takes place in the span of years. So in that sense, North Korea has more of a wiggling room to wait and recalculate their position. And we have to think again about what will be North Korea's calculation if President Trump faces a serious political challenge at home. And North Korea might think that making a serious offer to President Trump right now will be actually useless, because if there's a successor to President Trump this year because he gets impeached, then the new president in the United States might actually cancel whatever agreement that's reached between President Trump and North Korea. So that might actually incentivize North Korea not to extend concrete denuclearization concessions, but instead minimize the concessions to see whether the situation in the United States actually gets stabilized. Then the North Korea might be ready to resume the negotiation with the new administration in the United States. So this is a very important factor to consider when in order to assess whether North Korea will be serious about making serious concession at the second summit.
It seemed earlier this week that there was also further pressure mounting on President Trump after a report came out from a US think tank that unveiled details of a, quote, undeclared North Korean nuclear missile base. But actually, we have known about this missile base before. So is it fair that Trump gets pressure because of this missile base? Or is it something that we should also understand that it's not really a new revelation as such?
Well, I think the research findings by the U.S. think tank CSIS is probably meant to remind the educated audience in the United States and other countries that North Korea's missile and nuclear programs are ongoing and actually still expanding. So in that sense, it's a very valuable research. But on the other hand, you're right that these are known facilities, and North Korea has never made a pledge to shut them down. So in that sense, North Korea is not violating or deceiving anybody. But this is actually a good piece of research in the sense that North Korea's capability is real, it's still developing. And this is actually should remind President Trump that there's also a clock ticking in that regard, that if we don't do anything, we still just keep the sanctions against North Korea, that might actually not lead to anywhere in terms of solving the North Korean problem.
And not just reminding Donald Trump, but reminding the world, really, that North Korea really does still have a lot of developing nuclear weapons, and that is the reason why these talks are necessary. Let me move on to South Korea's perspective as well, because South Korea's foreign minister gave an interview while she was in the World Economic Forum in Davos, and she said concrete pledges will be needed for the next Trump-Kim summit. Now, that's seems to be putting quite a lot of pressure on Trump and Kim. Why do you think she said this now?
I think Minister Kang just, essentially stated what I've just stated, that actually acknowledged the fact that both countries are facing serious constraints. North Korea has to decide whether to make a deal now rather than later, given the political uncertainty that's growing in the United States. And then she's also stating the fact that President Trump should actually be aware of the fact that North Korea is still developing missile and nuclear programs, and it's better to reach a deal sooner rather than later. So I think it's just acknowledging the reality on the ground rather than putting pressure on either side.
But having a third party, the South Korea, who's involved heavily in this, to make these kind of comments, though, is perhaps doesn't really need to be said at this point.
Well, but this is actually it's a very important an opportunity for South Korea to, be transparent about its policy thinking. And I think, at least from my point of view, she did a good job of reminding the world that the South Korea is very conscious of the challenges and opportunities that's being presented in the second U.S. DPRK summit.
In the interview, she talked about various initial steps that North Korea could take, such as shutting down the Yongbyon nuclear facility as promised before, and allowing inspections of other facilities shutdowns. But she also mentioned that there are many other things that we can do before full denuclearization and sanctions relief. What do you think she meant by these? Do you think she meant other steps, or what other things could we expect?
Well, this is ongoing school of thoughts, especially in South Korea, that we should put more incentive on the table rather than, like a pressure to incentivize North Korea to come forward and then carry out the denuclearization promises that he had made before. So I think Minister Kang's remarks probably reflects this thinking that we should strengthen the incentive side of the deal. And then I think the possible incentives that we can do right now without undermining the sanctions would be to expand the humanitarian assistance in North Korea and increase the scale of the assistance. And also, like, I promise North Korea that there will be massive economic assistance if North Korea really carries out what he promised to do. So I think she's referring to that idea of making incentives more strong.
Before we go, let's pivot to the situation also that's happening in China. So a North Korean arts troupe has traveled to Beijing to perform in China for the first time in 3 years. What does this show about the current relationship between North Korea and China? Because this arts troupe performing does have some sort of significance.
Oh, definitely. We have to remember that when the last time the North Korea's art troupe visited Beijing, they actually left before doing their show, and then that's because Chinese authorities were very upset about the fact that North Korea has just carried out a major missile test. So, the contrast is actually very stark. And it also shows that the relationship between North Korea and China are very close right now, and that's going to be the case for a foreseeable future. So in that sense, this visit and the success of this visit, it says a lot about the state of the relationship between the two countries.
And Pyongyang does seem to be emphasizing the importance of it, because they've also sent Ri Su-yong, one of the senior most officials of North Korea.
He's a very important person, definitely.
So do you think he'll be able to, do you think he will have some sort of perhaps talks with Beijing officials while he's there as well?
I think he's definitely, I would say, he'll be the most well-known mastermind behind the current North Korean strategy and diplomatic strategy. And so therefore, what Ri Su-yong is going to say with the Chinese counterparts, it's going to carry a huge weight in determining the future of the relationship between the two countries, as well as the North Korean behavior at the second US DPRK summit.
Well, Dr. Go, thank you for coming today. That's where we're going to wrap things up.
It's my pleasure.